And next, we have from Cambodia, Executive Director, Young Entrepreneurs Association of Cambodia, YEAC. Please welcome Sambat Boon. Meanwhile, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce and hand over the program to our moderator for this third session. Let's welcome Senior Professor in Clinical Pharmacy and Halal Pharmaceutical School of Pharmaceutical Science, USM Penang. Let's welcome Prof. Dr. Syed Azhar Syed Sulaiman. And we hand over the program and this session to Prof. Dr. Syed Azhar. Silakan, Prof.
Thank you very much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. And very good afternoon, everyone. You are not burdened with the food yet, I hope. You just had a good lunch, and here we are talking about food. So before we are going to discuss or elaborate more on this issue, let me introduce a little bit about myself. Myself is known as Syed Azhar Syed Sulaiman from the School of Pharmaceutical Sciences. I'm also the chairman for the Halal in University of Science Malaysia, and I'm doing a lot of work with the clinical pharmacy and also Halal pharmaceutical. So here we are. We have medication person together with policy, entrepreneurs, and the CEO of the crops and so on. So slightly different, but not so much different. Okay, let me introduce our first panelist, Professor Syed Azam Ali. Professor completed a PhD in environmental physics at the University of Nottingham, UK, and worked as a groundnut physiologist at the International Crops Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics in India, and later he went back to Nottingham where he became the professor of tropical agronomy and chair in global food security. In 2008, he was appointed as a vice provost for research and internationalization at the University of Nottingham in Malaysia, and in 2011 becoming the founding CEO of Crops for the Future Research Center, the world's first center for research solely on the world underutilized and forgotten crops. So we can see a lot of things, and we hope we can learn a lot more from Professor. And he's also receiving numerous awards. In 2021, he was awarded an OBE for the services to underutilized crops and increasing global food security in the Queen's New Year honor list. Wow, congratulations. Okay, and Professor is also the author of the 9th Revolution, Transforming Food System for Good. So for those who want to read the book, inshallah, the book is available, right? All right, our next panelist is none other than the famous guy in Indonesia. When we are talking about Gojek, there it is. He's the one. He's the man. Okay? Tengku Mufizar Mahmud, an active communication, government relation, and external affairs specialist, currently heading the strategy division of Gojek regional government relation and public policy team. He's also holding the senior position for the extractive industry for corporate giants such as Vale and Freeport, Indonesia. And he's from Aceh. And of course, everybody knows Aceh. Yeah? And it's so similar to Penang in a lot of ways, foods and so on. And he has combined the private and public sectors working as a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering. But of course, now he's no more dealing with chemical engineering. But of course, he's still an engineer there. But he immediately started his career as a journalist covering the conflict in Aceh. Last but not least, we have a young executive director from Cambodia. Okay, Mr. Sambat Boon, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Okay, currently is the Executive Director and Secretariat General of Young Entrepreneurs Association of Cambodia. His focus is on supporting young entrepreneurs and also the MSMEs ecosystem in Cambodia. And besides managing the operation of the association, he contributes to the young entrepreneurs, supporting policy working with different stakeholders and government agencies, especially promoting the SMEs development through the public-private partnership. So we can see that Halal is still new in Cambodia. So we're going to listen to his presentation shortly, and probably we will be discussing more of that issue later on. All right, when we are talking about food, everybody needs food. And we know that with the increased population around the world, we're going to expect there will be a lot of crises coming up. Recently we have war between Russia and Ukraine, which definitely have the impact on the production of fertilizer, for example. Russia and Belarus is among two countries that produce very high numbers of fertilizer around the world, so that might have an impact. And it was estimated that around 2024, it could be ended, but again, it depends how well the war going to be there. So back to our first panelist, Professor Saib. Let's start with this question. What can we do about this over-reliance and impact of the dependence on all these issues? And how do you achieve the food security and promote sustainable agriculture? About all of the panelists are given about 10 minutes-ish. All right, so go ahead.
Thank you, and Salam alaikum, and my thanks to you, Chair, and to all the organizers for inviting me. I've come from the UK for this meeting because if we didn't know already, we now know that we're actually in a global food crisis, and a number of the speakers already today have touched on it. But our concern is really because of Ukraine and Russia and this question now about the dependence on so many countries on wheat, maize, soy, wheat, maize, and sunflower, particularly from those countries. But let's take us back a few steps and just see that we've had warnings about this global food crisis for some time. If I remind you about do you remember the ship, the Ever Given, that got blocked in the Suez Canal? And it was in March 2021, and that ship held up shipping in that one supply chain of food, the Suez Canal, for 7 days, and the cost was $38 billion of lost trade, delayed, damaged, or destroyed, including food. So we could see the signal there. The Suez Canal is 200 meters wide, and through that canal, so much of our food is transported from distant places, from where it's grown to places where it's consumed. If I give you a closer example, exactly where we are, the Malacca Straits, the maximum width of the Malacca Straits is the minimum width of the Malacca Straits is 2.7 kilometers. And between the Malacca Straits and the Suez Canal, 50% of the world's trade moves. That means in less than 3 kilometers of water, 50% of the world's trade. 90% of the world's trade is by ship. So if you just imagine any disturbance to that, the Suez Canal transports 19,000 ships, and just one ship can block that supply chain that we all depend on. Of course, I don't have to go on about the pandemic, but if we now look at the consequences of the pandemic across everything, supply chains, it was referred to this morning, supply chain reduction and demand reduction, which is very unusual. But also, just in terms of food and health, our biggest cause of death, other than aging, which we can't stop, the biggest cause of death from COVID infection are non-communicable diseases caused by bad diets. Hypertension, diabetes, and especially obesity. And again, we have the same issue. Bad diets make us predisposed to the consequences of COVID. We can catch COVID, but surviving it is very much dependent on our health. And our diets, quite frankly, are killing us because we now have more obese people on the planet than undernourished people. And this is an incredible statistic to actually refer. Climate change is always there in the background, but just this year in Delhi, the temperature reached 49 degrees in May. In May. And Spain, which is in, of course, Europe, it was 40 degrees in May. Now, if we think of those temperatures, those are too high for any of the major crops to actually grow. 49 degrees is lethal for most of the all of the crops of the world, actually. So climate change is always there in the background, and that heating and drought and consequences of climate change will only get worse. And then we come to the war, and of course the war is the one that we're concerned about. Even here in Malaysia, in Southeast Asia, we now know about places in Ukraine that we never heard of, and countries and supply chains we never thought about. If I just give you some statistics, Russia and Ukraine, between them, produce 28% of the world's wheat, 29% of the world's barley, 15% of the world's maize, and astonishingly, 75% of the world's sunflower. And that means 11.5% of the world's vegetable oils come from Ukraine. And of course, you mentioned, Chair, that of course fertilizer, you know, Russia is first, Belarus is first in nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus fertilizers, and not to mention Russia's control over energy supplies. Energy, which means fossil fuels, fertilizers, and food production, are concentrated in very, very few countries. So we have a global food crisis, and it's going to get worse because this year's yields are going to be down. There are floods in China, and there are droughts in the Great Plains of America, which are two breadbaskets of the world. And of course, we've seen the yield and the supplies of grains from Ukraine and Russia for this year and next, because of course, this is a war situation. It's not suddenly going to start being productive next year. Indeed, their ports have been mined by Russia. Even if they could produce grain, they can't transport it because their ports have been mined. So in all of this, we see that this crisis is here, and it's not going away. It's going to get worse. And therefore, we need to rethink our food system for all those reasons I mentioned, and one more, that it is the biggest cause of carbon dioxide emissions. 31% of the carbon dioxide emissions come from agriculture and the agri-food industry. So without transforming the agricultural system, we have no chance of meeting Sustainable Development Goals or the Paris Agreement to maintain temperatures below 1.5 degrees above Industrial Revolution levels. So I think I've illustrated the crisis we face. What is the solution, and how are we addressing it? Well, I'm afraid we're addressing it in the wrong way. We're doing business as usual, and more business as usual. So when we say Ukraine and Russia produce wheat, we're asking other countries, if you can't import it from Ukraine and Russia, why don't you grow it yourselves? Why don't you grow wheat in Africa? In sub-Saharan Africa, wheat is not realistic, but the African Development Bank is paying $1.5 billion to try and grow wheat in Africa. Well, if that was the case, we would have been growing wheat there for many years. So that solution is not the right solution. The solution has to be to diversify. And if I just illustrate diversification, as a single statistic, there are 7,000 crops that we have grown as human beings throughout our history, 7,000. 4 now produce over 70% of the world's food. So these same crops, wheat, rice, maize, soy, produce 70% of the calories consumed by 7.8 billion people. Now, if we go to 10 billion people by 2050, will those 4 crops, will they be enough? And then 10 billion people on a hotter planet that's 3 degrees hotter, will they be enough? And I sit here in Malaysia because countries like Malaysia are on the front line. Literally where we are is on the front line of climate change. If we look at yields of crops in this region, temperatures are increasing, droughts are becoming much more frequent, rainfall is becoming much more unreliable, and we're going to have to say, do we depend on others to produce food, or do we try and grow our own crops? Now, let me come to the solutions, because and this is my career really in work on underutilized crops, is that simple question, why are 4 crops the only crops that we think are important? Why does research only invest in 4 crops? Why does industry only invest? Why do markets only support? Why do supply chains only support 4 crops? Of course, there's more than 4 crops, but they are the ones that dominate. Altogether, there's only 12 crops that produce 95% of the world's food. So I've asked that question for a long time, and for most of my time, people have said, well, because they're the best crops. You know, if they weren't the best crops, we wouldn't grow them. My point is, they might have been the best once, and they might have been the solution once. They're no longer the solution for the reasons I've given. The volatility and unpredictability of the human environment and the physical environment of the planet are simply too great for us to rely on 4 crops to support humanity. So, why should we diversify, and why should Southeast Asia be the center of diversification? Well, firstly, Malaysia, and in fact the island of Borneo, so of course shared with neighboring countries, is home to 1 in 20 plants on the planet. 5% of the world's biodiversity is on that one island of Borneo. And out of 500,000 plant species, I've made that point, 4 are now, we eat 4. Imagine what we could do if we looked at those other plants. You mentioned, of course, your background in pharmaceuticals. Just think of discovery chemicals, bioactive compounds, pharmaceuticals, food, nutrition, feed, energy. Why do we need the same 4 crops to do all of that? Why do we grow more maize for feed for animals and engines than we grow to feed people? Why do we use food crops in cars? So these are the questions, and the opportunity here is huge because, first of all, there's a demographic that says young people, which we must attract into agriculture, are there. We have to attract them to become active agripreneurs so that they can actually see agriculture as a profession. Digitalization, which was mentioned many times today, is the way forward. Well, agriculture is no different. It has to be digital, and traceability. And specifically on halal, well, you can pick all 3 factors that are relevant to the food system. Islamic finance takes a long-term approach. It looks at shared risk. It looks at long-term shared benefits. That's the right system for us to actually build an agri-food system around. Halal tells us, the word wholesome was used, I think, a couple of times this morning, but more than that, it's traceable. We can actually see where our food has come from, and we can regulate or we can show the traceability of that food. So the ingredients we have in our food can be traced using halal technologies and an ethical approach to food. Food as a right, not as a purely commercial benefit. And if we look at all of these opportunities, the Muslim world is actually very well placed to be the leader of a different kind of food system to the one that we've now inherited largely from industrial countries in the north, which have no biodiversity. So the crops they're growing are actually our crops in the global south. The global south is the center of diversity. The global north is the center of production. So I make those introductory points just to say that we have to completely rethink our food system. And I say that not because I want a very dramatic change, because, we all like to carry on eating the same food. We all like to do the same things. We all like to go to the supermarket and know what we're going to buy. We have to rethink that. We have to think about new foods. And if I give you an example, ingredients. We always talk about food, and we always talk about crops. So we say wheat. Well, noodles are made from wheat, but they could be made from other things. The ingredients that we get from our staple crops are carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. We can get them from other crops growing locally that we can actually grow on marginal soils and provide nutritious ingredients. So we can do all of that if we rethink our food system. But the critical piece in that jigsaw is the consumer. Because if the consumer doesn't want to change their behavior and their eating habits, then the industry will be quite happy selling them the same food. Because when you go to a supermarket, you can see thousands of food products, but they're coming from the same 4 crops. So product development is where we really looked at food, the food system. And I noticed this morning someone mentioned, a lot of people mentioned supply chain, but I think it was a slip of the tongue. She said supply change. Well, I think that's actually exactly the right way. It's supply change we need. We need ingredients that we can actually see coming from different species, insects, plants, even fungi, that we can actually see going into our food system as foods of the future. And of course, I've run a center called Crops of the Future, which leads to Foods of the Future. And just one last point, which I think is relevant to Penang in a discussion that was held, very interesting this morning, is very many parts of the world consider their food as special. You know, the food they have a great affection and cultural identity with. Penang is a special case where it's diverse foods come from different cultural dynamics and cultural history. And last year in Rome at the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, we launched the Forgotten Food Manifesto, a manifesto for forgotten foods. And what it says is, these are foods we all remember from our past. Our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents had these foods. We eat McDonald's and KFC in supermarkets and shopping malls, but actually the foods we had in the past are actually forgotten. And those are the foods that we can now celebrate because they have cultural identity and they're local to our local systems that we can actually grow those ingredients to produce those foods. So this manifesto of forgotten foods is looking for regional manifestos. We have one in the Asia Pacific, we have one in Africa, we have one in Latin America. And if we can get entrepreneurs and food companies and the public to really get involved in this forgotten foods agenda, then we can actually see these forgotten foods being shared by rich and poor, by north and south. Italy has huge food tradition. How come Italy is always known for its food, and parts of Southeast Asia are not as well known as they should be? Well, if we can exchange food and culture, we have a really different kind of model for a food system that's local, that's sustainable, that's nutritious, and actually belongs to us, not to 4 companies that dominate the global food system. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Well, at least something that I learned just now, we have 7,000 crops that we have not yet even touched. It was a yesteryear's stories. But still, we only have 4, and we have thousands of it to explore. I give you just one example. Now is the durian season. Did you realize that from the skin of that durian, a lot of people might not even think about doing noodles out of it. But USM, for example, have made noodles from kulit durian. So don't be surprised in years to come, you are eating the whole lot of the durian, not just the flesh and the seed, but also the skin. You open up the durian and you are taking the skin of the durian to do the noodles. And that is one of the alternatives which we should have been looking at. But I'm really looking at the things you have just mentioned just now, Prof. It seems like it's a wrong way, things that happen in Africa and so on. And it's very much related to what I thought of policy, So we have our speaker here who is expert in policy. So how do you see this situation? For example, take it how the disaster management during the Aceh tsunami a few years back, and you're going to see that how does that policy kind of thing during that era and today's era, and how does the halal sector come into the picture? And for me, I'm not an expert in policy, but I thought that a wrong policy might lead to a wrong way of doing things, and catastrophe and point will develop at the end of the day. So, Tunku Mufizal, would you like to explain a little bit or discuss about the issue? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much, Professor. Allow me just to give a brief about what I'm going to be speaking about. Gojek is a ride-hailing transport company as it started, similar to Grab, but in Indonesia, now we've become a technology company that is a super app, and it provides not just only transport services, but food and cashless payments and logistical. Just to mention on policies, I think we've gone a long way to where we are right now, and we hope to expand where we are present. So not just in Indonesia, but we're present in Thailand and Vietnam and Singapore, the Philippines, and we hope to be present in Malaysia as well, just to provide that competitive edge for the customers. So allow me just to speak a bit about touching on the food security issues during the pandemic and how Gojek applied to that. So one of our products is food, and GoFood has been a very, very strong product for Gojek because 900,000 merchants live off being on our platform. And apart from that, we have 2 million driver partners as well on our platform. And our app has been downloaded over 190 million times. So just to go to the next slide. Yes. Speaking about where we are and how we're accessing the new markets now and how we're expanding. So the product is a super app, and we have 20 applications within our platform. So if you look at this graph, it just explains about how we are very much integrated technology solutions towards the daily problems of the local population. So we're expanding not just towards the food, but into businesses and how SMEs can develop themselves to be part of a digital market and digital platforms. We also are into logistics as well, and how we can effectively help consumers being able to trace their products and to reach them at the same time. And the traceability is a strong factor of our services. And not only that, in terms of payment systems. So we feel and believe that we're the strongest gateway systems in cashless payments in Indonesia. So the QRIS systems that are adopted by the central banks have started from us. So we believe that we're going to be a strong, thriving company for solutions for all the communities ahead. Next slide. Now, this is what we have done in terms of what we're looking into, how the SMEs have faced serious challenges during the pandemic. As you can see, 42% of SMEs utilize our digital platforms and social media. That has given a significant edge towards how their services are being utilized. 250,000 of our culinary businesses and GoFood have been very, very much benefited during the pandemic. 100 million GoFood partners and SMEs have benefited as well. We now, on our platform for the food services, we have 1 million orders a day. 1 million orders a day through our platform. So imagine how much of Indonesian population that we can feed just from that. And during the pandemic, even in worst periods of time, when people aren't able to exercise their willingness to go out and to order food, and you have to stay at home, and during the lockdown period, you can't imagine how much the service was needed by the population in big cities as well, and even down towards smaller cities. So the government really appreciated what we did to help during the lockdown periods. And imagine the social impact as well that we've been able to provide it. So we've able to increase the incomes of our merchants by 7-fold. So while people were losing their jobs, most of that population actually came and became our merchants. So we're able to give the livelihoods and change the livelihoods of people that were unemployed during that pandemic and started opening up businesses. Either they were starting become our driver partners, or they started to open shops from homes. But it really changed the impact. And now these businesses and merchants are very much sustainable where they are. So they would rather cook from home, feed the people of Indonesia from home, rather than being in offices and going for a 9-to-5 job. So that way of how we thrive during the pandemic became a sustainable solutions for many of the communities now. Next slide. So in terms of halal, as Puan Amna was saying about the certification in Indonesia, it's very much a reality. This is something that many of the Indonesian population think that this is just a label, but something that becomes a trust value and becomes a trustworthiness of looking at the hygienic perspective of this halal certification. We really hope that we can tap onto this. So we're now encouraging our merchants, over 1 million merchants that we're now encouraging for them to get halal certification. Of course, this is not something that we can set a mandatory policy, because the government itself is now getting on to this. So thank you very much, Muhammad, for giving us a good example for the Indonesian government. So but I as well now hoping to bring back that message that halal certification is very, very important. So what we're now starting is that the halal certification that our SMEs are now been obtained from the government, we're providing on our application. So when the customer orders the food, they're able to see the certification of the food itself. So it says here that the customer can be notified that the merchant is certified halal. And certified halal is audited by the MUI, or the Muslim Ulama Society, but the government has its own body that certifies the halal products from merchants. So that increases the trust and the safety of the food that we consume. So Gojek through GoFood hopes to display the halal logo on its application to help customers understand where and how important this halal certification is. Next. So what's our role? Gojek is very much taking a role to educate our merchants. So during the pandemic, we weren't able to do much of the offline trainings, but we were able to do a lot of online trainings. And a lot of the online trainings that we've done was able to reach out to a lot of the merchants. And we joined and collaborated with the government on this. So the Halal Certification Institute of the government, under the Ministry of Religious Affairs, we worked closely with them to conduct as many trainings as we can. Until this very day, we hope to increase that level of training to educate our merchants. So we can't enforce them to be certified halal, but by that education helps to increase that awareness for them to see the benefits of this. Now, another factor was the price of halal certification. Remember, a speaker said it's quite expensive. For Indonesians, the price of halal certification was about 5 million rupiah, around 350 US for one merchant. Now, to encourage the increase of that numbers, the government drastically decreased that price. So it's now around 500,000 rupiah, about $30. But even that $30 margin is still very, 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 very hard for small, medium enterprises to start. So you can imagine that halal certification has a long way to go, but we're very much confident that that's the sustainable solution in terms of really ensuring the trustworthiness of the food supplies that the Indonesian population is consuming. Next. Now this is the last slide. This is our social impact. So for companies that think that CSR is an important component, for Gojek it is, but the component of CSR is in the social impact that we bring to our driver partners and our merchants, that we're able to work closely, for an example, with the Ministry of Agriculture to ensure that the access of staple foods was able to be obtained during the pandemic. So we have an example. The ministry has a state-owned company called Toko Tani. So you're able to buy your groceries, all the fresh foods from Toko Tani. But what we did was we helped to digitalize them. So we worked together with the Ministry of Agriculture to digitalize Toko Tani into our platform so that our merchants, when they sell the food, they know it's coming directly from the farmers themselves through a platform that was established by the government and combined within our platform. First of all, that. And second of all, is logistics. So every time that the customer orders a food product or groceries from Tokotani, it will be sent and delivered by our driver partners. So that way, it not just increases in terms of the income for the farmers, but also for the drivers, and that ensures that the merchants are getting the basic ingredients of the foods that they're producing directly from the farmers. So that supply chain is addressed in that context. And with the availability of GoFood in Jakarta right now, it's also in different places. So this is an example. We're not centralizing the technology. It's decentralized as much as possible to other regions as well. Now, the collaborative means we also did with the government was when we started this service for delivery of groceries, the government injected funds. So this is something that we're encouraging as well, that when as private companies, as technology-based companies, funds don't directly need to come from the company, but how we can have and establish a collaborative means with the government, that the government can see that public funds can be utilized for the benefit of the society and the population through technology, through technological platforms. So we work together with Tokotani for this. We're now, finally, we also look into traditional markets. And when you talk about food security, it comes back directly to the farmers themselves. And during the pandemic, traditional markets were really badly hit. So what we did was we digitalized the traditional market. So we came in to help the local sellers within traditional markets to come in within our platform. And when the local population was not able to shop in the traditional markets, our drivers went there and shopped for them. So the basic food supplies, you bought your eggs, you buy your rice, all the basic needs that you cannot go to the market due to the lockdown, someone came out there and did that for you. So ultimately, we believe that technology can be a solution towards the everyday life and the problems that we face. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. So you can see that how the pandemic have changed the world. The technology, whether you like it or you don't like it, you have to like it. It makes a different thing. I was wondering, without Gojek, lo bagaimana ini mau makan rawon setan ini nggak ada nih. Penasaran gue. Kasihan deh lo. For those who can understand Indonesian. For those who can't, it says that I'm really craving for rawon setan. Rawon setan is a kind of food which is very noted in Jakarta. So thank God we have Gojek around that can really make things different right now. So that's how the policy make it different, So thank you once again, Tengku. And to Mr. Samban Bun, Cambodia is very new with the halal concept and so on. How do you see this issue pertaining to food security among the young entrepreneurs, and also how does it affect the food chain supply in Cambodia with the technology and also food processing during the pandemic? Mr. Samban Bun?
Thank you so much, and thanks to organizer, and especially thanks to Fazil inviting me to the panel. And Penang have been one of my favorite city to come, and I have never been to Penang, it's my first time. And it's also about food as well, so I like eating food. And okay, if we talk about halal, it's very new to Cambodia. Even we have a lot of workshops presented this morning from the panelists. There's a certain program on halal in Cambodia, but still a very new concept to Cambodia. If we talk about halal, if we talk about halal versus safe food, what would be the word that people in the world will choose? And you talk about what the popularities of food. So why food why we cannot make food to our own countries. For example, what would be the popularities of food in the world? We will talk about Japanese food, we will about Korean food. I just came back from the US and everyone talk about they like Korean food, they like Korean barbecue, they like Korean Japanese barbecue. So how we can internationalize our own countries of food into the world? But it depends on the taste, it depends on the geographic, it depends on how the ingredients are made. So it's all a combination of everything. And Professor has mentioned about the macro level, about the food crisis, and pandemic have added another crisis into the food supply chain. But there's an opportunity, like they mentioned about the young entrepreneur, what can they do? And they are young, they're looking for innovation, and technology is happening now. Like in Cambodia, during the pandemic, no choice. They have food supplier and the restaurant have to go online. You have no choice. Otherwise, you have to close down, and it really severely affect that. One of the bad situation and serious, because Cambodian have been announced like agriculture countries, but all the food have not been exported. All the food have not been converted into the final product. Mostly we consume the raw products, the raw food. Just like rice is our common food. But we cannot make some other crop, other food into the final product in order to, even for the local market and also for international market. For example, okay, this slide I just add up this morning because when I came here, some of us asked where Cambodia is. And where is Cambodia in ASEAN? You can see Cambodia is very central of ASEAN. You can just fly. You can see the distance is average flight is 1 hour. But to here, we have to transit in Bangkok or transit in KL. But we are very central. All right, next slide. All right, so very brief about association. We are Young Entrepreneur Association. Young here is below 45, so it's still. All right, so we have a member who are working on or have a business in different type of field. Agriculture is still very less. Next slide. And you see, when we talk about food and agriculture or food processing in Cambodia, we can see that only 10% of Cambodian total agriculture is output process. Even though we are agriculture country, we export very, very less. So we have abundance of the local agriculture product, crop. We have not been processed and make into the final product. Because of many few reasons, we can see we have a low level of private sector investment. We talk about policy. There is not yet a certain policy to support. We don't have a large scale of investment. It's about investment on the machinery, about the equipment. I've been talking to some of the young entrepreneurs. They said that I cannot invest on a big investment on the equipment because it's very costly. And if I only use it for the mango, and when the mango season gone, how can I use that machine for some other crop like durian? We have durian as well, but we never make any dry durian like Malaysia. So technology in Malaysia is quite interesting how we can export the technology into the developing countries just like Cambodia or some other country who need the technology in order to make to process their food into the final product. I was lost in the building this morning, just before I came here, but I went, it was a very good experience. I came through many booths about food in Malaysia. It's many booths that I cannot find in Cambodia. So I believe there's a lot of opportunity for Malaysian in order to export the technology to make use of the regional crop in the Southeast Asia as well. So these are the problems. Like food processing is still less, like 2% of the total investment in Cambodia, and we don't have a lot of opportunity to export as well. Next slide. So this is some suggestion and also from the recommendation from Professor. It's quite similar, like we need a private sector investment, we need innovation and also the value-added agriculture product, we need digital and the remote application and training human resources are very important. So, and we also highlight 9 value crop that that's an opportunity to invest in Cambodia as well, like including mangoes, lentils, cashew nut, we had pepper, we had sweet potato, avocado, sesame, palm sugar, and dried banana. So it's not limited to that, but these are the crops we have not been processed and also make into the final product to be in the local market or in the international market. And my final comment is about a young entrepreneur and the SME. It's about how we can work together to make the ecosystem work and also support together, because we cannot do the business in the whole ecosystem. We need a group of SME to support each other. For example, if you want to produce a bottle of water, where the lid come from, where the whole bottle come from, where you can make the label, what type of water, how you can equip it together. So it's all about technology. It's how you can produce. You cannot produce the whole thing, and how you can market your product. How can you export? If you are working on the production, you're working on the market, you're working on the export, it costs a lot of operation. But if you are working in the ecosystem, I'm sure that there will be support from each other. That's why SME clusters still come into the idea how they can support each other, especially on the vocational training and the human resource development as well. Thank you so much for just a comment for the first stage. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. All right. So you see, when we are talking about halal, especially in food kind of things, there's a lot of issue that you have to look at, from the crops, developing up all those things, and also the policy and how the young generation should be trained to look into the aspect of food security and so on. I still remember, because I'm in pharmaceutical and also nutraceutical, did you know that in a cosmetic, especially your lipstick, you have more than 20 things which you don't want to know it is there. One of those is urine. Another one is sperm of another animal. And also whale vomitus. Welcome to the world. Okay, so you see how the thing is right now. So before we end up, I just would like to open the question to the floor. Should the floor have any question, just mention about your names and to whom the question is being asked for. So welcome, anyone? There will be some prizes from Gojek. Come on. Everybody is so shy. All right. Thank you very much. Just mention your name and where from and your question and to whom should be the...
Yeah. Hello, my name is Amna. I'm from Serunai. I'm from Malaysia. This is for the professor. So you mentioned that, the human being today is only producing that specific crop. Number one, why don't they produce the other crop? My question. And what are the initiatives, for example, United Nations or the world today, especially G20 and everybody, to change that because of the environment has become more hotter than usual? Your answer, sir.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. I think we got into a habit in the 1960s of yields being the volume of the crop, the tons per hectare, the number of calories, industrial production methods that were tuned to just 4 crops. So the system at the time was to feed the world. I mean, that was the Green Revolution. The challenge was, how do we feed the world? Well, we can feed the world. We've got more food now than we actually have demand. I mean, our waste problem is another issue, but there is enough food. But we didn't switch from that to producing nutritious food. We still depended on calories. And as you know, when you go to the shops and you go, and I know, Gojek will be delivering food, but one of my suggestions, maybe a conference like this, a really good opportunity is, could we encourage them to deliver or have a special brand for forgotten foods, where we could actually say, we're going to promote local foods, and we would give an opportunity for local growers to produce foods that are actually identified by local communities. Now, when you've got the marketing budget of the food companies, when you've got the industrial manufacturing systems, you can see why we got addicted, and we did, to these very calorie-rich, highly processed foods, because the whole system was geared towards that. And now we're recognizing that, but change is very slow. And I think that one of the opportunities we now have is crises bring opportunities. Now we have an opportunity to think differently. We shouldn't go back to business as usual. And interestingly, countries that are really at the front edge of the new food system are the countries that don't normally think, you don't think of food. Singapore, you know, it's got 6 hectares of agriculture, yet it's got a policy that's called 30 by 30. It'll be 30% food secure by 2030. And it's going from 1% to 30% in less than 10 years, because it will do it differently, because it will use rooftops and vertical and urban. It won't grow rice on rooftops. It will be using new ingredients. Qatar is now 60% food secure. It used to be 1% till the Saudi blockade crisis, when they stopped export, or they stopped the trade across the border with Saudi. Qatar said, we can't afford to have a population that can't feed us, you know, especially their guest workers, who 1.65 million guest workers. So they then said, we'll invest in a desert in production methods that make us less dependent on the rest of the world to feed us. So opportunities come in those situations. The shame is when you have all the resources, like the biodiversity and the human resources and land that Malaysia has, it doesn't see that new way of thinking as a necessity. But I think it really should be thinking about that now as an opportunity. And that's really where the investment has to come in, new opportunities. So ingredients, all these ideas that we use, the whole food, the whole product for different purposes. Technology is there. We have the technology. It's getting into supply chains to change food companies so that they actually start looking at these ingredients for scaling up to a supply chain that you could actually imagine would feed more than very, very limited numbers of people.
All right, thank you, Prof. Probably Tengku, you would like to say something? Yeah.
Just to add on to what the professor was saying. Interesting enough is that technology and an application like Gojek can help to promote those ingredients. Just try to imagine that now the customer does not only think about this ordering fast foods and foods that are not healthy, but the local foods that we promote through the application. Try to imagine that increases the level of orders to them. So the local Padang food, the local Sundanese food, the local Rawan Setan food from Jogja is all being promoted at a very high scale level. And the application itself introduces the people to that they can know what's nearest to them, what's the most popular and high-rated foods that can be ordered on the application. That covers all the ingredients that not only just being grown on a normal basis, but all the rempah, the spices that comes into the food can also be put into the foods that are produced locally and can be promoted by an application like Gojek. Thank you.
All right, thank you. It seems like we would like to extend another hour for discussion. Unfortunately, we don't have that leisure time for us. So thank you very much. Let's give a very big applause to all the panelists today. They are the expert. Just remember that the technology is there. We have to change accordingly. It's where we work wise and we're going to survive on that note. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time. And don't forget, nasi lemak Penang is a heaven for food. So try nasi kandar, try durian. It's a season for durian right now. And you're going to see that Penang is never lacking of any food that you can take home. Kalau di Yogyakarta itu rawon setan ya. Kalau di sini ya aduh, nasi lemaknya enak banget loh. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again. And I hope that you enjoyed the session. And thank you once again, all the panelists.
Okay, thank you to our moderator, Prof. Dr. Said Azhar. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to thank our...